Sorry, everybody. You can unhook her now. She can. Yeah. And so all of these materials come into the desert, right? From that source. That's one answer, right? Other answers may be, right, that even though they are quote unquote in the desert, right, there are settlements around, right? And this is where, that this, maybe they came from those places. All right, so just to continue, but I do think it's that Arthur's question is a great one, right? Why this list, right? And is this a common thing? I don't know the answer in terms of other early scriptural things.
It's commerce.
Well, right. I mean, it's very detailed and very concrete. Yeah. Right. Very detailed and very concrete.
Business.
Right. Right. And we'll get to a little bit more business, so to speak. Go ahead.
From what I can see, they were just told we're leaving. They didn't even have time for this bread dough to rise. How do they have time to go around and get the reparations or get all these things? And these were people who had no money. They were slaves.
Yeah. Well,
were they expected to bring every one of those things, or maybe one thing or two things?
Well, again, very interesting, right? So this is one of the things that we're going to get to, right? Is sort of thinking about how does a community put together the various resources it needs in order to do what this passage is talking about. So let me finish reading it, and we'll figure out what is it they're doing, right?
And why would God want all these? This is expensive stuff,
right?
Couldn't He just ask for their faith or belief in Him?
Great.
That's
a great question, right? That's a great question. What does a community need?
Concrete items.
Concrete stuff, right? Is one way of looking at it. Hey, Suzanne, say your piece, and then I'm going to read the rest of this.
Well, in between here and there is the golden calf. So they obviously needed something concrete. And this is, I mean, if it's going to be for God, it should be the best. Right.
So, I mean, so Suzanne is bringing up sort of it's not the elephant in the room, it's the calf in the room, right? And it is actually really interesting, right? That this feels to us like, oh my gosh, all this really strong. Why can't we just have faith, right? Or trust or whatever it is, right? Well, the people, they want a God they can see.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right? They want a God they can touch. And the thing about God, Hashem, right, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, is that you can't see God, right? God is represented not by anything that you could see or touch, but by the space defined by the two kruvim, right, by the two cherubims. And so that empty space, right, is sort of what we're supposed to focus on when we're looking for God, right? Either in our mind's eye, right? We're instructed to sort of orient our thoughts, right, to Jerusalem, to the Holy of Holies, right? That empty space, right, which is seen as the domicile of God. So this continues, right? Tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood. Acacia wood? Where are they finding lumber in the desert?
Yeah.
Right? We'll get to that. Actually, I'll just tell you. So the Midrash says acacia wood in the desert. And they said, well, Jacob had foreseen all of this and planted acacia wood on his way to and from between Israel and between, Eretz Yisrael and Mitzrayim. Thank God Jacob had this sort of forethought, and so the acacia wood was a mature forest by the time the Israelites were.
And there are oases
Yes,
in the
right,
desert.
yeah. Oil for lighting, right? Oil you'd get from olives. Very interesting. Olives require
Olive
trees,
olive
right?
trees.
Spices for the anointing oil, and for aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for the setting, for the ephod, and the breastpiece, right? There we're talking about the priest's vestments.
The Kohanim.
Right. So very important, right? Another piece that this little introduction is citing, right, is that we need a space, right? A holy space, and then the people who move around and do things in that holy space need to have special clothes, right? A kind of a special uniform that only they would use, right? You can't just go in your street clothes. One of the funny, it's actually funny, I remember Reb Moshe was a teacher of mine. I don't know if everyone in the room knows Reb Moshe. He was the rabbi here at TBZ for many years. And I remember I showed up the first Shabbos when I was the intern there, and I had a tie. And he said, "Never wear a tie again." I said, "Why not?" He said, I said, "Because there's people in the congregation who do." I thought it was the right thing. He said, "No, if you start wearing a tie, they're going to make me wear a tie."
I can see you
know
saying
what?
that.
I'm sorry?
My boys were sent home from KI Hebrew School because they were not wearing socks.
Right.
Joe Collada sent them home.
Yes. Yeah. And so, right. And so it is, when I was at KI,
Yeah.
right, not only did I wear a tie, right, I wore a suit every Shabbos, a suit for Shabbos. So as soon as I got my job up in Cambridge, I was like, I wear a tie and a jacket on two sorts of things, three sorts of things, I guess: funerals, weddings, and b'nai mitzvah.
Right.
Other than that, forget it. We still do have, our tali tot, right? It's, sort of various ways of setting ourselves up for divine service. Okay. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Right? Why do we need a sanctuary? Right? Because we need God to be among us. Right? It's not so much, right, that God, hey, thank you. Sorry. They always want to be with the one that doesn't like them.
No, I like them very much.
Okay.
My grandchildren's dogs lick my shoes. And that's what they're going for.
Right. Exactly. It's so right. And I think one of the very interesting things about Judaism, right, is that over the centuries, Judaism has had to expand the idea of, well, what constitutes holy space, right? In the Bible, right, holy space was the tabernacle, right? And later on the temple, right? But as we became, a people an international people, right, with Jews everywhere, right, more and more, right, we had to sort of say to ourselves, God goes with us into exile, right? God's presence doesn't leave us, or we don't leave God's presence when we leave Eretz Yisrael, right? And so, which is very different, right, from many of the religious and national cults of the olden days, right? If your God was defeated, right, then you went and joined some other God, right? Here, right, the temple fell, and God goes with us into exile, and that's a pretty radical notion. But it does sort of suggest, right, that ultimately different sorts of sacred space are not only necessary but possible, right?
But what?
that different sorts of sacred space are necessary and possible.
So why did the list of things come before a sanctuary?
Yeah, interesting. And exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, so shall you make it. Right? So there's this real emphasis
So
on
they can see.
on exactly the thing, right? And there are parts of, there, and then what comes in Truma and Tetzaveh, right, is a whole description of the stuff that you're gonna build, right? Which people find a little dry, right? And it's difficult to read, right? Because there's so many words that are similar.
Yeah.
It gets a little bit tough. And then we have Kitisa, the parasha, the portion of the Torah where that talks about the golden calf, right? Then we have the final two portions of Exodus that talk about, well, then they built it, just as God had put down the blueprint, then they built it so that it can become a little bit like, whoa, this is a lot of detail. But it is interesting, right, that the golden calf happens according to according to the text, right? It happens. According to its placement in the Bible, it happens between these two things, right? According to the chronology that the rabbis come up with, right? It happens before either of those things. Right? So, and there are midrashim, right, that are very interesting that sort of say, that sort of getting to this idea that God does actually care about the people and wants to have a sanctuary, even though they sinned with the golden calf, right? Despite the fact that God is still committed to this relationship, and in a sense, even more so, like, well, we really need this place, right? That it's necessary for humans to have a place that they can designate as a sacred
Some of the
space.
Chumashim, there's a picture of the Kohanim and what they wear.
Right. It's quite elaborate.
Yes.
Exactly.
But God does not, Adonai doesn't dwell in the sanctuary,
Yes.
right?
Well, it's very.
So the purpose is to bring Israelites to the sanctuary to have a place.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, on one hand, we can say that God doesn't really dwell in the sanctuary, right? Because well, it says right here, God dwells among the Israelites.
Yeah.
Right. On the other hand, right, there's like God's presence so fills the tent of meeting, right, that Moses can't even get in there. Right.
Oh.
Right. So there is a sense in which both of those things are true. It's very complicated. I have to say that I still find it very mysterious. And I still sort of struggle to fully grasp this set of sort of paradoxes, right? That God is sort of everywhere with us, yet we need to do these things in order to have God dwell among us, if that makes sense. All right, so let's continue. So the first thing I wanted to say here is that this, and I just sort of mentioned this, I think this is important, right? So it says, tell the people, the Israelites, right? The yikhuli, right? Very interesting word, right? That is not to bring gifts, right? It's take for me gifts. And then that word is repeated, right? A truma, right? What do they say here? Gifts. In Rashi, they call it a heave offering. And I meant to look up the word heave offering to try to figure out what it means, because it's not a word we use in English anymore.
A gift would be a latana. Truma is a sacrifice.
A truma, right? It's a sacrifice. It's a kind of it's an offering, right? An offering, right? And we'll talk about this in terms of Rashi, right? And then every person, right, who's yidavenu, right, who is so moved, right, someone whose heart moves him. So these are voluntary offerings, right? Very important. And later on, right, it says, and I forget exactly the chapter and verse, right? It says that they brought so much that Moses had to say no more. Right? You got to stop bringing stuff because we're overwhelmed. We have more than we need. Right? And then libotik hu, right, et terumati, take my heave offering, right? So again, this emphasis on taking, which is really, really interesting. And the Eitz Chaim actually has a nice little midrash, I think it's a modern midrash, talking about the fact that in essence, right, anyone who gives with a full heart, right, really is taking, right? It's a way of understanding that old adage, which I never understood as a kid, right? It's better to give than to receive, right? Because, right, when you give, you're also getting, right? And when you're receiving, pretty much you're just receiving, right? And so that this is something very powerful in, I think, in the psyche of our people, right? That we have this sort of notion, the importance of giving, right? And that the rewards, so to speak, of giving, that we get back, not necessarily, obviously, in any kind of a financial way, but in spiritual benefits. All right, so let's move to, all right, so tihu et trumati, this word truma, and again, I apologize that I didn't look up the word heave offering. Do they give a little, go ahead, Suzanne?
I tried looking it up, it doesn't, it means offering it up.
Oh, like heave.
Yeah.
Oh, got it, okay, thank you. All right, so ye shall take my heave offering. All right, so our rabbi said that the expression truma is used here 3 times. So you'll see in the, it uses the word 3 times. I'm not going to go through it. All right, and that's an allusion to 3 different heave offerings, and it's very interesting. Sort of, what are the different heave offerings, right? One is the offering that consisted of a becca, a half a shekel a head, and of which all the sockets were made, as is set forth in Pikudei. So this, when if we get to this, you were saying, Ruth, it's all business, right? The Eila Pikudei these are the accountings, right? So it counts up all of how much silver, how much gold, how much copper, and then what that stuff was used for, right? So it's like a balance sheet, right? And another is the heave offering for the altar, a becca a head that was given to the funds in which collections for for communal or charitable purposes from which to purchase the communal sacrifices. This is what we read about on Shabbat Shekalim. It's the very beginning of Parshat Ki Tisa. It happens in Adar, the very beginning of Adar. So we are in Adar 1. So, closest to the beginning of Adar 2, we will have Shabbat Shekalim, right? And we'll read about this second Truma, right? And then it might even be the same. No, it's the next week. Next week we'll read Pikudei, and we'll read about the one that he just mentioned here, right? And the other one is the one that's implied in the word Truma, my heave offering, and referred to by the word kesef in the next verse. The heave offering, which was for the tabernacle, which was a free will gift from each individual. Okay, so there are these three different heave offerings, truma, right? And two of them are this sort of half shekel, right? One, that everyone has to give, right? And then this one is this voluntary one. And again, sort of the overall question that I think, is we're getting at is, right, how does a community provide itself with what it needs for sacred service, right? Yeah.
I remember when I met Marty and they went to their show in the West End, I couldn't get over it, how they raised the money. People stood up and they would say, so Mr. Rabinovitz, how much do you pledge?
Right.
It was, I thought it was,
Well, it's very,
coming from a Reformed synagogue myself, I thought it was unbelievable gross.
right. I remember I went to a Sephardic shul in Philadelphia with a friend, and the deal basically was to do an aliyah,
Yeah.
you had to, in this shul, and it was the first time I had ever seen it.
Yeah.
And
You have to what? Hey.
well, you don't pay that, you pledge. You pledge. And so it was this very interesting thing, because obviously only people with funds, right, are in a position to, on the other hand, right, it means that you can go to shul and not pay anything because you got these machers who are putting all the money in. So it's a very interesting kind of public way of doing exactly this, right? And of course it was, and many Jews, right, are horrified by this idea, right? And so, the Christian way, right, of you put your check or your money into a little envelope, right? And the envelope goes into the collection plate, on Sunday. Well, that's not going to work, right? Even in a Reformed synagogue, although when I used to go to a Reformed synagogue, the rabbi would say, if you carry money on Shabbat, please put some in the tzedakah box on the way out. Because he knew, that lots of people were headed out to dinner right after shul. So, which I didn't really know was a thing. It was very interesting when I began to, I went to New York, and I went to a Reformed synagogue down in New York, and some people who were there that I happened to know invited me to go out to dinner with them, right? Other places, maybe I get an invitation home for a Shabbat dinner. Here I get an invitation to go to Nobu. Okay, I'll go. All right. But right, so how yeah, go ahead, Harriet.
I think that the giving money for the honor of coming to the art, maybe European, because my parents were part of a European congregation in Pennsylvania. And the chief way they raised money for the high holidays is you bid for the honor to come out.
Yeah.
And if you had money, you got there, but it was very serious bidding.
Right.
Very serious.
Right. Oh, yes. I mean, and even at KI, I remember at KI when I was there,
Yeah.
Was it KI? Oh, was it? They had these little Aliyah cards, and you get the Aliyah card, right? And you would fold,
Turn it over.
you turn over the amount of money you were pledging, right? They wouldn't, getting an Aliyah didn't mean that you had to give, but it was sort of like, you got to give something if you get,
That's what.
So those are on the seats now.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But what worried me was, did they also give out, because Marty was involved in giving out honors,
Yeah.
did they subconsciously give out honors to the people that they knew could pledge the most?
These are great questions, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, each synagogue, right, always has, is, as Harriet's saying, right? I do think it was something that was very common in Europe, right? But probably again only among Orthodox Jews. I think the Reformed Jews in Germany, they didn't want to be that way, right? They wanted to be like their Protestant neighbors, very decorous and not talking about money. We're not supposed to touch money on Shabbat. Why are we talking about it, right? I mean, go ahead.
When I was a little girl in Shul Yontif time, people would give and they would call their names out and how much they gave. Then after a while, we got those little cards.
Yeah.
And even in the women's section, everybody got that little card and you push down the little,
Yeah.
the little tab and
Yeah.
it started at high at 18 and went up.
Yeah.
And then there was the Yontif bonds, when everyone was buying bonds.
Yeah.
But those were the only 2 times of the year that money was ever mentioned.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Unless there was, even the bar mitzvah sometimes, no, they wouldn't pay for the aliyah
Just the
then.
holidays.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just that,
the
yeah, the holidays is still, yeah, it's still a thing, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It
So,
was a donation, it wasn't paying for the aliyah.
Right.
It was a donation to the show and you got to cover.
Right. all right, so here's Pikudei. We'll just look at this really quickly, just so you know what I'm talking about. Right, so this is at the last parsha of Exodus. We'll get to it in a few weeks. These are the records of the tabernacle, right? This is the accounting books, right? And they got copied into the Torah, right? The tabernacle of the Pact, which were drawn up at Moses' bidding, right? The Pact is it was the work of the Levites under the direction of Itamar, son of Aaron the priest, now Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. Judah had made all that the Lord had commanded Moses. At his side was Oholiab, son of Ahis. Every time this happens, sorry. Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, carver and designer and embroiderer and blue and all this, right? And again, so it goes through all the materials again, right? All the gold that was used in the work came to 29 talents and 630 shekels by the sanctuary weight. The silver, right, of those of the community who were recorded came to 100 talents and 1,775 shekels by the sanctuary rate. A half shekel a head, half a shekel by the sanctuary rate for each one who was entered in the records from the age of 20 years up for 603,550 men. The 100 talents of silver, right, were used for casting the sockets of the sanctuary and the sockets for the curtain. 100 sockets to the 100 talents, a talent a socket, right? And so in that much detail, right, because as I think somewhere it talks about the fact that there's no other silver used in the tabernacle. This is where all the silver that came in was used on these sockets. Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
So unlike what people were talking about with pledging and money and
Yeah.
who has the most, the half shekel was required of each person
Yes.
over the age of 20, and they could not give more.
Exactly.
So everybody was equal.
Right. It's very, very interesting. Right. And so this one that they're talking about, right, they're saying is the census that was taken at the beginning of the book of Numbers. And because that's what we get this number, right, 603,000. And very interesting, right? And we'll read in a minute the thing that Suzanne is saying, right? That we don't take more from someone who's rich, and we don't take less from someone who's poor, right? So this is kind of the opposite of the nidava, right? If your heart can move you all it wants, you cannot give more than half a shekel. Yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
So we're talking about the slaves who came out of Egypt, who spent all their lives being slaves. Yet we have bookkeepers, we have people who keep accounts, we have people who have talents, who make things. So all these gifts that these people have naturally, obviously they never used. And now that they're free, they can express who they are.
Well,
Okay,
that's actually a really interesting question. I decided to take the day off yesterday, and I went to Salem, Massachusetts, to go I went to the Peabody Essex Museum,
It's wonderful.
which is great. If you ever have a chance to go up there, the
We've gone to
museum,
the building a few times.
the museum is amazing. Anyway, they had this collection of shoes.
Yes.
And one of the shoes they thought had been used by an enslaved African American who was a blacksmith. And so it's easy to think, right, of enslaved people as being unskilled laborers, right?
No, they weren't.
But I mean, a lot of them have all kinds of skills. So we don't know. I think the answer is
Yeah,
we don't
but in
know.
order
I
to
mean,
make all these things-
remember Joseph was the slave, right?
Right.
First to Potiphar and then later to
I
Pharaoh.
mean, they had to have the talent to.
And
make these things.
he was the main man.
Right.
He had all kinds of talent. So presumably all the Israelites had something, right? Some sort of gift to give to God. All right. So and then here, this is that last one, right? The Lord's, this is from Kitisa, right? This is the other Truma, right? The Lord spoke to Moses saying, when you take a census of the Israelite people, and this is what happens in the book of Numbers, right? Each shall pay the Lord a ransom for himself on being enrolled. Hello, Lois. Hi, Mickey. That no plague may come upon them through their being enrolled, right? There's this sort of this to this day, right? We have this sort of Jewish aversion to counting people, right? You don't count people. So if you want to figure out, do we have a minion? You say not one, not two, not three, because God forbid you count them up, right? And then there's a plague, right? You don't want to put a plague on people by counting them, and which is always very interesting to me because God seems to demand a census, yet a census is really dangerous. Now, of course, in this country, we know how dangerous censuses are. These are fraught, obviously, in all kinds of different ways. But we won't go too much.
Is there such a thing as an individual plague? I thought plague was a more general phenomenon.
I mean, a plague can descend upon a group of people, right? And just like COVID, right, it can affect some, but not others. So, I mean, they just had this big article about what is it that has kept so many of us from getting COVID while so many others of us get it, right? We're not going to say, well, God decides. I don't think, right? I hope not, at least. But there's something going on, right? I think in the Bible, right, the plagues, there's a plague after the golden calf, right? There's a plague after the sin of the spies, and it doesn't affect everybody. So it's a good question. Okay, this is what everyone who is entered in the record shall pay: a half shekel by the sanctuary rate, 20 gerahs to the shekel, a half shekel as an offering to Hashem. Everyone who is entered in the records from age of 20 years up, presumably also, I don't know if this is women and men or just men, shall give the Lord's offering. The rich, as Suzanne has already noted, right, shall not pay more, and the poor shall not pay less than half a shekel when giving the Lord's offering as expiation for your persons. Very interesting, right? That everyone is equal in this regard, right? So there's this very interesting kind of reality, which I think is sort of a reality for us to a certain extent also, right? That we're sort of aware simultaneously, right, that we're all the same and that we're not the same at all.
But this should be at the beginning.
It actually is.
If everybody should
Right.
give all this,
Right.
and now he's saying everyone gives the same.
Right. Again, these are two different givings.
Yeah.
These are two. So again, this gets again to the question of how do we maintain space? How do we maintain religious figures, right? The priests and how do we make sure that we have offerings, right? Back in the day, right? We need sacrificial offerings for the community, right? Today we need to make sure that we have Kiddush wine and we have, challahs and, and whatever, we need stuff, right? And so there's this sort of duality, right? On one hand, we need to make sure that everybody is paying and everyone has equal responsibility. And at the same time, we kind of need to recognize that there are some people whose hearts and pocketbooks, right, will move them to offer more than other people either will or can. And so we have to call on those people, right? And I think what you've pointed out, Ruth, which is great, right, is that it's also a matter of, it's not just a matter of material resources, right? It's also a matter of who can do, who can make the art, right? Who can sing, right? Who's good with the butcher's knife, I mean, like all kinds of different tasks that are necessary, right? To have a community, a sacred community, right? You need all kinds of different gifts. Okay, so, all right, so now, oh, wait, we didn't get the, we didn't get the thing that I thought I put here. Okay. All right. All right, so lechaper al nafshotechem. All right, so we'll get a little bit, this might get a little bit deep. So if we're drowning and it's not making any sense, then we'll just get back to what we were talking about.
I'm swimming.
You're gonna make it to land.
Right, we'll make it to land. All right, so this is one of the questions that Rashi asks. What does it mean, right, that we're going to make expiation for our souls, right? Lechaper al nafshotechem, right? This sounds like it's Yom Kippur,
Yeah.
right? Lechaper, right? And so we have to make expiation, like, and so part of this process of providing a truma, right? This offering that we've shown, and that's actually really interesting. I just put this together. The heave offering, right, that you're showing it, right, is similar to this business of showing people what I'm giving, right? This one, Moshe ben Maimon over here is going to pay $1,000, right, for the honor of this aliyah, right? And I'm lifting it up. Right, I'm lifting it up. I'm showing it. It's sort of like a very intense version of the book that we get from many places every year that says, these are our diamond sponsors, and right, and these are and this is every zhlub that gave $18, right? So, and so there's this, and it's interesting, right, that there's this sort of argument in development circles, even in Jewish ones, right? Is it better to give anonymously, right? Because Maimonides says, right, it's most pious to give it, or we don't give anonymously because we want to inspire other people to give. And if Schwartz is upset that Feldman gave this big gift, then maybe Schwartz is going to up his gift, right? So.
That's why we had an issue about publishing the weekly Shabbat and listing donations.
Yeah.
Because it inspires other people to do the same thing.
Exactly. These are not new ideas, right? These are not new ideas. And I love this fact that, like, these are donations that you're supposed to make noise about, right? I think that's really interesting. And it so much goes against sort of my own sort of emphasis on modesty, right? So which is just my own thing. Other people have different things, right? But go ahead.
But there's so much that a show needs that you don't get paid for.
Right.
My father was the shaman. She went in, he made sure the doors were open, the lights were, all those things that really people do for the love of the show, right, and not for money. Right. Without them, it's just like
100%.
They need the money, but they also need people.
Right. Well, again, I mean, that's right. And so, right, that's one of the reasons why we have shul presidents, and we have, people who, we have, I mean, what my I don't know, I'm not exactly sure what we call it in Jewish, but back from my church days, the altar guild,
Right.
people who would sort of come and make sure that everything was beautiful before the service, right? All right, so this is in order that you not be liable to the plague in consequence of the census. That's what we already discussed, right? It's not really clear, still not clear to me why counting people causes plagues, but let's just accept it. Another explanation, right, is it really is an atonement for their sins. Like, in a sense, it is sort of a Yom Kippur kind of a moment, right? Because scripture alludes here to 3 different heave offerings, since it uses the expression Trumat Hashem 3 times, right? Again, 3 times in this passage, it was 3 times in the other passage as well. Very interesting. One mention is an allusion to the heave offering that was to be used for the making of the sockets, which we discussed, right? For Moses counted them when they began to contribute toward the building of the tabernacle, when each gave half a shekel, the total amounting to 100 talents, right? Which is not very much in comparison to some of the other materials, right? That were, and of these sockets, the sockets were made, as it is stated, and of the 100 talents of silver were cast the sockets to the sanctuary, etc. The second heave offering was also levied by way of census, for he numbered them again after the tabernacle was erected. That is the census referred to in the beginning of the book of Numbers. And the Lord spake unto Moses on the first day of the 2nd month of the 2nd year, take ye the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel. And on that occasion, each of them gave half a shekel. These were employed in purchasing the communal sacrifices for each year. Rich and poor were made alike in regards to these half shekels. And it is in reference to this heave offering that scripture here uses the expression lechaper al nafshotechem, right, to make expiation for your souls. For sacrifices were brought in order to make atonement, right? So in order to have sacrifices, in order to placate God in the wake of our sins, right? We each need to bring a little bit of money, right? Because we're people, and so there's going to be sins, there's going to be trouble. We have to be able to do this. And wait, I just had a thought, and I can't. And the thought came and went. So I apologize.
You too.
All the
Yeah,
time.
and you're
Oh
much
my
younger.
gosh.
No,
No,
it's
this is
okay.
like the worst thing now is the cell phone. Because I go on, I say, oh, I've got to do X. I turn on the cell phone and it says Y on the cell phone. Right. And so I manage Y, and then I'm like, oh, wait a second, what was X? All right, what am I going to do? All right. The third heave offering was that offered for the building of the tabernacle, as it is said, Exodus 35:24. Everyone that did offer an offering of silver and brass. In this heave offering, however, they did not all participate alike, but each one brought whatever his heart prompted him to give. Right, and this is what we saw in the beginning. So these are 3 different types of the 3 different heave offerings, right? And it's interesting because what it says in Talmud Yerushalmi, right, is that this happens every year, right? It happens, as I said at the beginning of the session, right? It happens every year on the first day of Adar, right? That people should bring their half shekel, right, and contribute it so that there'll be there'll be enough for the coming year for everything. Presumably this was done in some sort of, I don't know exactly. I mean, I don't like to often think too much about what it means in practical terms because it's just like
Complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. Exactly. But it is interesting that this Talmud, this piece of Talmud talked. We can look at it briefly. Okay, so on the first of Adar, one proclaims about shkalim and about kilayim, which means the things that are mixed. You're not supposed to have certain plants
Shatnez.
planted next to each other. Shatnez is one thing, right, in terms of the clothing, right? Don't mix linen and wool, right? In agriculture, there's certain species that are not supposed to be planted next to each other. You're not supposed to use
And
two
oxen
different
over
types of
here.
women, two types of
All kinds of
animals,
things.
right? So, yeah. And on the 15th of that month, one reads the Esther scroll in fortified places. Right?
What does
Why
that mean?
fortified, like,
Fortified means a walled city, right? So CCB, by the way, is not on Purim. CCB is transformed into CCB Ra,
yeah.
which means fortress. So we always do Purim here at CCB on the day of Purim and the evening of Shushan Purim. So everyone can go to their own synagogues if they want, and then we're going to have a party here on the day of Purim,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
which is also, it's actually going to be super fun because it's also St. Patrick's Day. It's this weird concatenation. So somehow we're going to have to get green beer to drink, as we make noise with our graggers.
Shabbos
I'm sorry.
and on Christmas, a lot of yontifs are falling. on-
Yes, we had a lot of yontifs together, and we had Martin Luther King Day was the same day as Tu B'Shvat,
Yeah.
right? So it's been a weird
It's every-
mix of the Jewish and non-Jewish holidays.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So it's going to be it'll be both, but we're going to have a klezmer band over at Dinesh in the evening.
Oh,
The second night, of Purim. So if you can get over, please join us. It should be
So
super
we're gonna
fun.
have green hamantashen?
That's a good idea. I love it. I love it. Basil flavored hamantashen. Or no, parsley flavored, because we're getting ready for Pesach, so we need parsley flavored hamantashen. Okay. And one repair, so very interesting, right? One repairs the roads and the streets and the water poles and looks after all the public needs and marks the graves. And then also goes to inspect for kilayim, but we already talked about kilayim. But very interesting, right? That it's sort of like it's infrastructure day,
Yeah.
right? Why is it infrastructure day in Adar?
because it's spring.
Because it's spring. Be a little bit more specific.
Well, it's easier to mend the roads when there's no snow on it.
Well, I mean, we're talking, the Holy Land, right? So probably not so much, probably not so much snow. Probably the potholes, like the pothole I fell into on Friday night, Jacob, was there. All of a sudden we disappeared for a few minutes and then we came back, thank God. Now, and I missed another one that the following day, I missed one. And oh my gosh, it was yesterday. There was one on Soldiers Field Road. This pothole that was like the size of my car. I don't know how I missed it. It was crazy. Anyway, but yeah, so it all of these things, right? And we mark the graves. Also, we don't mark the graves in cemeteries. We mark graves that are not in cemeteries, right? Because we want to make it possible for everyone to come for Chag.
Yeah.
Right? The pilgrimage holidays, Purim is like an early warning sign, right? Adar is when we begin to prepare for Pesach,
Yeah.
right? So this gives us a month and a half to make sure the roads are passable, right? That no one is going to stumble over a grave and become ritually impure by touching a dead thing. That there's going to be enough water available for everything, right? Because we've had this blissful, months and months and months since Sukkot with no holidays.
Oh,
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, the holidays are coming again, right? It's time to start, it's time to start contemplating, okay, well, should I really buy this next bag of flour, or should I just make do with what I've got, right? So because Pesach is here soon, right? So this is all getting us ready for Pesach,
No
right?
more peanut butter because Pesach, he says Pesach is for 2 months.
Hey, Okay, and then of course, if you hold now with the new conservative movement reading of the Pesach rules, right? You can have kitniyot. So go ahead and have your peanut butter on matzah if you want. You know, like it's each person, each family has to make up their own mind about that. Right. All right. So right, and so on the first of Adar, one proclaims, why do you do the shekels? Right, because Israel should bring shekels at that time, so that it can be dispersed from the new contributions of the treasury on time for the first of Nisan, right? Because we have to make sure that we have our Pesach offerings early, right? We have to let them sit for a while. So anyway, we won't need to get into the details of this, right? But it's very interesting, right? That as we were saying before, Ruth, it's all business.
Oh, did I say that?
You did. It was very wise, right? That there's a lot of concrete details, right, that we need to attend to in order for us to have a true experience of the holiness of the days, right? That as I was saying, I think to Suzanne another time, right, that like to really do Shabbos, right, you've got to spend a lot of time planning and working so that Shabbos can actually feel like Shabbos. Right? And there's sort of this real emphasis and understanding that there is a really tight connection between the concrete and the spiritual. Right? That to get to that spiritual experience, you really need to double down on the concrete stuff. Go ahead, Ruth.
Shabbos would be like any other day if you didn't have Friday night chicken and the Havdalah and the candle and go to shul.
Right.
Otherwise, when I first moved here and I didn't go to shul, it didn't feel like Shabbos.
Right.
Then you didn't draw pictures.
No,
You
no.
didn't use your pencil.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were certain things you don't do.
Right.
So.
And
according to what you believe.
right.
So
And
it's
again,
not
right,
a holiday.
it's really interesting because there's things that you don't do on Shabbos,
Yeah,
but if you don't do them the day before,
yeah.
you're going to have to do them on Shabbos, right? And then
Okay.
Shabbos is not going to, I'm not talking about painting pictures, although, I'm talking
If
about
you're
like cooking your
Orthodox-
chicken, right? If you don't cook your chicken and have it ready for Shabbos, then you have to,
You're Orthodox, you start on Sunday in your mind already getting ready.
right, of course.
You know,
Right, because then it
it's
really,
only a week I have to get ready.
right,
No, but I'm saying it's
yeah.
in your mind.
yeah,
Like when you said, it's now I know after Purim, oh, Pesach's coming.
exactly,
So that's
exactly.
how we're wired,
Right.
how I'm wired anyways, you too.
So
You
anyway,
have to live among Orthodox people if you want to be happy with children. And we didn't. We came to America and it was so lonely on Shabbos and
Oh, see, I loved it.
right, I think that's true. I think that it is, so that is another component, right, to the larger question that we were asking. What do we need to maintain a sacred community, right? Is you need a community of people
who do the same thing.
who are, they don't need to do exactly the same thing,
No,
but they
but
need to be, they
They
need to be
understand
in
you.
the same sort of range of this. Their practices have to be within
Yes,
reasonable range of your practices in order for there to be a real feeling of connection, right?
yeah, it was so lonely.
Right. And so it does really sort of raises a lot of questions, right? About, well, what is the nature of, and I do think that it's one of the reasons today,
Yeah.
right, why spirituality is so much more popular than religion, right? Because we all tend to be so isolated today, and you can meditate all by yourself, right? It's better, right? If Mimi were here, she would tell you, right, that community is just as important in Buddhism as it is in any other religion, right? But in this sort of Americanized version of, spiritual practices, right? It's very easy just to sit in your own house and meditate and forget about connecting with other people.
Well, because of COVID now and TBZ, you turn around and look at the computer,
Right,
all those people are still part of the show.
exactly,
Even though they're not there.
right. Right, and that's a whole other question that we won't get into.
No, I'm just saying, so they could dump it at home, but they wanna,
Right, but,
You know,
well, I mean,
and you can
and,
put
and
on
it,
the
and it,
TV.
and it is actually really an interesting question
Yeah.
of, what will be the long-term effects of Zoom davening on religious practice, and not just in Judaism, right? In churches are having these conversations as well.
and they have wonderful services on Shabbos from New York.
Right, I mean, who needs to go to shul? You can just
Yeah.
watch Central Synagogue, yeah. I mean, because, and they're great, and they're great, yeah.
There's options, but that's still keeping people close to Judaism, whether it's in the shul or it's not.
I mean, it's an interest,
Oh, it's
right.
Shabbos.
right? So, anyway, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, to be continued as always. Thank you very much, Harry, for being here, and Jacob.
So we're having a Purim party?
We're gonna have a Purim party.
Oh, wonderful.
Purim party, if I can get myself together. I'm even I have the beer kits. So we're gonna make beer, and so there's gonna be